He's immensely seductive. Quite sure he's right. Obsessionally neurotic. Pretty dangerous, in fact.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories.
Do you mean you doubt your powers to convince him?
Say it! Say it!
All right, I'll say it.
Worse than that. What I'm afraid of is his power to convince me.
We're talking about putting a manifestly irresponsible man on national television.
Sweetheart, be reasonable.
What? This is the end game.
All right, everybody. It is Friday, April 25th, 2025, the 96th day of the Golden Age. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. We can just get right into it today. If you were following the show, round about 6 months ago, or maybe more recently than that, 5 months ago, back in the late fall into the winter, I was talking relatively frequently about a philosopher named Nick Land, who is considered one of the two main figures in the neo-reaction, the neo-reactionary movement, the other being Curtis Yarvin, who is the kind of philosopher king of Peter Thiel and J.D. Vance and some people along that track, many of the tech libertarians, because his prescription for society is very much aligned with the book, The Sovereign Individual, that was written in 1999. And there's a lot of interesting ideas and a lot of valuable ideas in both Yarvin's writing and in The Sovereign Individual, but I don't necessarily agree with the conclusions. And part of the reason I don't agree with the conclusions is that they believe some version of history that they're aware of is true or true enough. And Yarvin actually kind of skirts the issue even a little bit more by saying he's just going to use the official narrative and like official central narrative and official central counter narrative when it comes to history in order to defeat what he calls the cathedral, which is basically the information delivery and cultural formation segment of what I talk about as the regime. And I don't think that he generally looks at the world as a system that is ultimately governed by a top-down centralized control structure. So we have some pretty considerable divergences in our viewpoints. He's also a scientific materialist, a secular Jewish atheist. He says that his grandfather was a communist who helped defeat the Nazis, went to Brown University. So he thinks he's the most far-right person in the world. I would suggest, or at least in the rooms that he's ever in, he's actually said before he would be the most right-wing person in every room that he's in. I don't find him particularly right-wing on a number of different grounds. Well, back to the ideas, which are interesting and how they see society going. The Sovereign Individual and Yarvin's ideas focus more on kind of a normie understanding of how the world operates. And I think that Nick Land has diverged significantly from the kind of roots of the neo-reaction, which were 10, 15 years ago, and sometimes even longer than that in the case of Yarvin's writing. He seems to be headed not toward nihilism and atheism or anything of the like. He seems to be headed very strongly toward the awakening. And I think one of the primary reasons for that is that he is highly cognizant and factors in the way that beliefs are formed through information in an information war amidst the propaganda, understanding the false realities with thinkers like Baudrillard well in his past, and he has advanced that part of thought without committing, at least in my reading, to any form of the nihilism that those postmodernists would have engaged in. Nick Land, I don't think, would qualify as a postmodernist. So I have been delving back into Nick Land over the past few weeks, just because I think he's such a clear thinker, also because a very highly intelligent, extraordinarily literate friend of mine, I kind of convinced him to read Xenosystems, and he absolutely loved it. So we've kind of gotten back into Land a bit together. So Nick Land, I guess, within the last few years was banned on Twitter and has resurfaced with an account called Outsideness. And that is a reference to what he believes. He believes the answer is outside. You have to reach the outside, which requires exit or escape in his terminology. And that's kind of being outside of the matrix, if you want to think about it in simpler terms. And I think that that's what I'm all about. You know, we've got the political thing not totally solved by any stretch, but we're in fair shape on that. And the understanding of it, the ability to observe and monitor politics as it happens in America, it has become kind of almost second nature at this point, not getting hoodwinked, not getting caught up in the bullshit, not needing to invest all our time and emotional energy in the rage bait of the daily political soap opera that plays out on television. And when we get that far, that allows us to focus on what sorts of things we need to do to prepare ourselves and our family and our community. And, you know, as you go out into the future about what's actually coming, rather than playing at the pace of the television. And hopefully it'll allow us to, in some sense, escape that matrix where you are actually able to then be attacking the matrix itself rather than just trying to survive within it. And so the outsideness name, I believe, in addition to the reference that I just described, is also kind of a continuation of his now, I guess, dormant blog that exists on Substack. He has written in various places over the years. This is, from my understanding, the most recent place to read his regular writing. But the account is Zero Philosophy, the Outsideness newsletter. And I want to share some of this article from 2021 called Rules. Non-serious political philosophy is the subheading here. And you'll see what he's referencing with the serious and non-serious. And I think that that can be thought of as kind of parallel to when we're discussing how things are fake or potentially narrative only, and then we approach them in a much different way. We don't take them seriously. We take the game that they are a part of seriously, while leaving ourselves open to different interpretations about the substance of a given issue. Kind of the narrative only approach that Burning Bright and I talk about with some regularity. And I actually sent him this yesterday. We might get into a little bit of the discussion we had about it afterward. But let's get started. Social reality might not be a video game, but there's no point trying to imagine that. Crass realism obscures the rules. Besides, society converges upon a video game or immersive ludic simulation, even if it isn't one already. Such gamification is a trend to note. It has multiple drivers. As games get more convincing, they increasingly set the default perceptual frame. In technologically advanced societies, game-like systems are becoming the obvious model for self-understanding. The reception for stories with this slant continuously improves. Even scientific theorizing is drawn to them. The topic might seem less than serious, even definitively so, but ultimately it isn't. Alternatively, it might be said that there is a non-seriousness more serious than seriousness itself. Everything will be gamified. And in terms of gamified, he goes through talking about the example of wargaming in the thermonuclear age. He talks about pickup artists, how they turned mating into a game. And in a game, of course, there is competition, and you're trying to win. You're trying to figure out how to play the best within the set of rules that confine the game. So I'm going to skip around through this. I would encourage reading the whole thing. It's very interesting, and I think Land is an incredible writer. He says, turning it into a game is the first step to become good at it. In the same way, war is the game of princes. Everything is a game to those who are good at it, and as a condition of them coming to be good at it. This is the serious non-seriousness previously touched upon. Excellence has ludic foundations. Play or be played, as it is cynically said. So if everything is a game, then you have to play it. If you want to be successful, then you have to play the game. And the only way to be good at the game in order to win is to play the game. So the game is operating whether or not you're involved. It makes sense then to understand the game, participate in it, and attempt to be good at it. He says, good or well-constructed games have a number of characteristic features. Firstly, they can only be played by the rules. Cheating is forbidden, less than it is made impossible. Physics is like this. It prescribes nothing that can be done, as Crowley notoriously noticed. Rules that can be broken are a failure of game design. The more impractical it is to cheat, the better the game. Secondly, they have an implicit meta rule that strictly prohibits changing the rules. To change the rules is to invent a new game, which cannot be done during play. Different games with different rules coexist simultaneously rather than replacing each other successfully. And there's a note to that I immediately thought of, and it's well represented in the comments to this post, that in the age of the internet and online video gaming, the video game companies, the creators of the video games who are running the online experience, actually change some of the parameters with pretty regular frequency. They will just update patches and the game will become whatever they update it to. They say when you're like in a fighting game, for instance, if you have weapons and they find out one of the weapons is too powerful, everybody starts using that weapon and kicking ass with it, then they'll nerf that weapon. They'll make it softer. Or if a weapon is too weak, they'll buff that weapon and make it stronger. So they do kind of edit the parameters, and they do that from the centralized authority behind the game. And so that is a reasonable critique to the theory here, but we can understand that and then still return to what he's saying and understand this. Thirdly, rule sets permit outcomes without ever dictating them. Rules and strategies are mutually independent. Strategies compete within rules rather than over them. Strategic modification of rules or the adaptation of rules to strategy is essentially corrupt. So you can't bend the rules as part of your strategy. Your strategy has to be developed within the rule set. And I think maybe you can see where he's going with this and then how it's going to guide our conversation today when it comes to the inverted rules of our politics, as we discussed on Wednesday. Fourthly, each is fully enveloped by some consistent incentive structure. This renders success and failure unambiguous, grading performance. The players always know how it went. So you play the game within the rules. The game comes to a conclusion. You know if it's win, lose, or draw. It's not a mystery. The rules indicate what the winning qualifications are. Burning Bright in our discussion yesterday was calling them victory conditions. And you can kind of think about this as goals and apply it to your life even. The games favored by game theorists, such as variants of the prisoner's dilemma, compose a small subset of well-constructed games. They cannot be transcended by cheating. Game modification is never a permitted move. They permit no legislative power. Each has a single reward dimension. The breadth of application suggests these constraints are not difficult to meet. It might even seem that any alternative to a well-constructed game is anomalous in its degeneracy. To be a progressive is to be in favor of changing the rules. There is one arc of history, and it is made of reforms. Old rules and structures of oppression are considered broadly identical. A conservative is against changing the rules. If they are changed, they stay changed, because changing them back would still count as change. Thus, the much derided function of conservatism as anchor for the progressive ratchet. And what he means by anchor for the progressive ratchet, this is a concept that is present throughout his writing, is if you think of a ratchet, like a wrench, you twist and it winds back, and you twist to tighten, and it winds back and you twist to tighten. And so the wrench just goes in the same motion back and forth, but the nut or the bolt that it's tightening is continuously left in the same position as the ratchet returns to its initial position. So the idea being that once the progressives make progress, the conservatives then end up being the party that they might be contesting the progressives when they want to make more progress, but they don't want to actually reverse the quote unquote progress made. So they are the anchor of the ratchet. They are the thing that stays still in that position and doesn't actually loosen with the turn back of the ratchet. I hope that makes sense. A reactionary holds that the rules should never be changed. Reaction would be delight in restoring old rules were it ever in position to do so. It never is and will never be. A neo-reactionary accepts experimental variation in rules only when rule sets are multiplied. New rules are to be tolerated only alongside, in addition to, and as a concurrent alternative to old rules. They are legitimated only by hard forks. That means a split where the two things diverge, never to return, never to become one another and converge ever again. You go one way, the rest of the people go the other way, and never again the two shall meet. Anything else is progress, which is, in all cases, misfortune. Progress is reform without schism. While wrapping itself in the mantle of science, it incarnates a drastic violation of scientific method. Positive or negative characterizations of progressive experiments are equally misleading. Progressive change is not experimental, but rather something closer to the opposite. It substitutes for testing and disdains control. Synchronic comparison is deliberately suppressed, and the more thorough the suppression, the more progressive it is. Multiplication without difference is bad, but difference without multiplication is worse. And so when he's talking about the multiplication, he's talking about creating parallel systems alongside. He's increasing the number of options, and then people can select their own option. And then the market, an actual free market, not capitalism as it operates in the world, not our markets as we're told they are free, not what we're told is free trade, but an actual free market, actual market capitalism. A number of options, an array of options is set out. People gravitate toward one or the other, and that option begins amassing power and may eventually become the only option if everyone goes that way, or if the system becomes large enough that everybody is kind of joining it by default. In a corrupt society or bad social game, the ruling class makes rules. There's nothing natural about this, regardless of what we are told. It is only in the wake of a radical socio-cultural calamity that it happens. And so, is this our culture? In a corrupt society or bad social game, the ruling class makes rules. That's what we have. It's not everybody deciding rules. It's that there is a small subset of people creating all the rules, and they get to change them on the fly whenever they want, or they get to violate them, or and this is the real trick, they tell us they actually haven't changed the rules at all. The rules just always meant the new thing that you're certain they didn't mean before. He goes on. In any well-constructed game, winning is entirely distinct from rewriting the rules. For instance, a speculative investor, however successful, does not modify the functioning of the stock market any more than a chess master takes advantage of each victory to change the way the pieces move. Now, that's basically the same complaint I would have about and that other commenters had about the former point about the rules not being changed. I would suggest that the people running the stock market have been able, and we're actually going to get to some of that later, to manipulate the rules of the market, or at least game the system from outside using influence that exists outside the rules-based structure inside the game. Capitalism as a game works well when businesses follow economic rules they have no role in formulating. Even in the political sphere, comparatively stable constitutional principles and norms are expected to conserve themselves resiliently through vicissitudes of party conflict. This point might confidently be strengthened. Invulnerability of political rules of the game to party fortune is regime stability. Invulnerability of political rules of the game to party fortune is regime stability. Do we have that now? You could say, well, no, because the party that we would be talking about with a proper understanding of American politics is the uniparty. It seems as though the two political parties operate in a rules-based system, but when you understand it as one political party working together as a progressive body, ultimately, the progressive conservative distinction within the uniparty evaporates. The contrary condition, in which party dominance overwhelms political rules and permits the dictation of new ones, defines revolution. And so then the question would be, when was the revolution under this definition that I just described? When did the uniparty rise to prominence so that there was no other true option, and so that they could game the system and change the rules to their liking and benefit anytime they wanted? Now, maybe that revolution was the original revolution. It's possible, we've talked about the possibility before, that the Constitution was actually a compromise in favor of the regime compared to what was the status quo before. Also, it could be the Civil War, and maybe that's even a better case if considering the original revolution is just too offensive or heretical or whatever. But certainly the overthrow of the Constitution in the Civil War would qualify as exactly this sort of state that brings the uniparty into existence and makes it so that there is that body that can game the system, change the rules of the game on the fly, operating to their own benefit. Competition within rules is politics, but competition to set rules is war. When politics seems more like war than it used to, this is why. And that's, in my estimation, the key line right there. Not that we're done, but that's at the heart of the issue. When politics feels like war, this is why. Competition within rules is politics, but competition to set rules is war. And that's exactly what we see right now. We see war between Donald Trump and the uniparty. It's system versus system. Are the rules going to be the way they were originally intended by at least some of the founders, and certainly the people who established America and the states before the constitutional age began? Are we going to play by that set of rules, guaranteeing and preferencing American liberty and individual freedom and a Republican form of government? Or are we going to preference, are we going to side with the system and then preference the goals of the Reconstruction as George P. Fletcher in Our Secret Constitution describes them? Are we going to focus on equality over liberty, the good of the state over the good of the individual, and a democracy over our constitutional republic? That's the war that is playing out right now in our society. It is a war to set the rules. They had taken the rules, they had inverted the rules, and if you don't want to say it's the Constitution, and it may not be, if the Constitution was actually protected and not immediately abused and defiled, as though they did not intend to do that when it was ratified, then it would at least be the Civil War when that revolution occurred. And then everything that's been founded on that revolution since then is part of that new rule set that we are told is the original rule set. This was just people over time deciding that the original rule set wasn't good enough, and so they changed the rule set. The original rule set contained all these ways to change the rule set. And, of course, they've already snuck one by you if you go for that, because the 14th Amendment, again, this is Fletcher's argument, a progressive himself and a Zionist as well, Columbia Law School professor. He argued specifically that the Civil War was fought to overturn the Constitution and that the 14th Amendment provided for a secret constitution, a second constitution, in the language of others who have written similar books about it. Because everything that was in the 14th Amendment gave the government power to have a say-so over everyone's business interactions and then personal interactions to ensure equality so that no one could ever be enslaved. Of course, there are more slaves in the world right now than ever before. We have a slave trade operative at the southern border. We have indentured servitude, slavery, performed by all those illegal aliens for our biggest corporations, living at company towns, receiving government stipends for their food, their living, their health care, etc. And then, of course, we have tax slavery and wage slavery of the American people. And, of course, that's our state from birth. We all come with a serial number. Oh, it's called a Social Security number. It's not the same as giving you a number. The common law tradition permits no legislation. Laws are discovered, never made. The notion of lawmaking is abominable and inconsistent with the existence of a free people. According to the only truly English position, legislation is always and essentially tyranny. So the idea there that the system should not be changed and cannot be changed. And I mean, it's hard to deny that. I mean, we've gotten indoctrinated, inculcated, the belief has been inculcated into us that this is how our government works. This is how our society works. The purpose of government is to constantly be updating the rules to make our society work better and better and better. Well, that's actually not what the government's supposed to be for. That's not what it was intended to be for. The original Constitution made it very difficult to change the law in any way that would be a violation of what was put in place, the Constitution that was put in place. And the legislators, when they swear their oath, swear it to the Constitution, which means they should not be proposing laws that would violate the letter or spirit of the Constitution, the common understanding of the written Constitution by the people. And the people would then have the right to strip back their delegation of power in the instance where the legislators did that. If they violated their oath, well, then they're committing treason. And the president would then have the responsibility as well to never violate that oath, to never do anything that would contradict the Constitution. And these were things that the founders certainly understood, but that we don't understand now at all. The original Constitution is not a thought in the vast majority of Americans' minds. They believe that the Constitution, as it's described now, is the Constitution. It's the original Constitution. Whatever statutes, regulations, rules, laws, norms, and court precedent layer on top of that to change and invert it, all of that to them is still the Constitution. Do we need the Congress to legislate? I have argued numerous times on this podcast that we don't. First off, they're illegitimate, so they have no right to legislate. Them pretending to hold a position of public authority, in my mind, is already treason, as it was for everyone in the Biden administration and everyone in the deep state and the bureaucratic administrative state. None of those people have any legitimate power to be making rules to govern how the American people run their lives. And I think the same can be applied to the states, although it's a different case in the states, because the states have a wider range of subjects. They don't have in the original system. They wouldn't have had. They would not have been able to violate the terms of the original Constitution, but otherwise, they can legislate on issues that the federal government wouldn't then be legislating for all the states. And the way representation works in a localized way makes that sensible. All right. Social domination is a contender for the worst constructed game in history. Let's keep changing the rules until everybody likes it. It suggests tacitly. It simultaneously makes other suggestions which directly contradict this, but never to the point of ensuring its retraction. As if this were not already bad enough, it also mandates universal cheating. Its rules are so numerous, unstable, and poorly formulated that they are both theoretically and practically unintelligible. The latitude with which rule violations are to be avoided or penalized has become a strategic consideration. Players in weak positions have to scrupulously avoid gross rule violations and are increasingly terrorized by trivial, absurd, and informal norms. Players in strong positions get to ignore any rules they don't like. And there's one more paragraph about this, but this is the party of false decorum, okay? A game of social domination to ascend the hierarchy through the accumulation of social status and reputation and other forms of abstract social power that allow people to amass power that would be undue based on merit or based on the rules of the system. This is a system where cheating is the norm. And we've talked about that many times. When you are trying to compete in the party of false decorum infrastructure, the way to ascend is to have somebody on a higher rung pull you up. Well, how do you get them to do that? You better do something that helps them empower themselves. And when you go up high enough on that ladder, you're also going to have to be under control so that you can't subvert any of the power of the people on that level. So at that point, you are talking about, and you've probably done a lot of favors or have been easily controllable for people on higher rungs, which is what causes them to pull you up. And that's often through corruption or personal compromise. So in the game theoretic notion that he's describing here, that would be the game of social domination. And the cheating, the playing outside the rules, and the knowledge that you're not going to be punished for doing so is part of the game of social domination. And that's an abuse and corruption of the system. And that parallels exactly to how we understand our politics and that game that is set up. The best social domination players get to decide whether to permit opt-outs from social domination or opt-outs. The incentive effects here are entirely predictable. However much you hate the game, you have to win it to escape. Those who like it are far more likely to do well at it. On the rare occasions when those who don't like it do well, they suddenly find they like it more than they had thought or have invested too much in it to quit. And here you can think of people who will in some way compromise themselves in order to get ahead in a structure like that. They have to do something that they didn't want to do. And they've been doing those things for so long that they can never imagine turning around. They thought that the entire purpose of their lives was to win this game within the status hierarchy that they've been playing. They've invested so much that they don't want to turn around, walk back down the path to the beginning, and start off in a different direction. Nonetheless, that's what you have to do. Those who like it are far more likely to do well at it. On the rare occasions when those who don't like it do well, they suddenly find they like it more than they thought. Okay? So that's someone that doesn't want to play that game. And then all of a sudden they're just pulled up to one of those higher rungs, maybe a stroke of luck, a coincidence, a meeting, some quality networking, a favor that they were just the right person at the right time for. And all of a sudden they're way more powerful than they were before. And to maintain power at that level, well, then they have to play the game, and they don't mind the game as much because now they're able to reap some of the rewards and avoid the punishment structure. Okay. To escape it means fighting it, which means playing it, which means investing in it. Getting out involves putting people into a position from which they can get you out. And that position turns out to be a lot more comfortable than either getting out or letting anyone else out. These dynamics are clear to everyone. And again, in terms of the party of false decorum, this is what it is to be exiled. You have to accept that you are going to be destroyed and then deal with that. Or you have to play the game so well. You can actually just accept all the punishments and escape. That's possible, but you're going to incur those losses. And I wish that he had spent a little more time on that aspect, but that's okay. And let's skip down to the bottom. We'll do a little bit more than I highlighted. Any exit ramp that looks serious is fake. Social domination manages serious threats easily, making them actually non-serious. Such challenges fall under its rules dialectically and merely make it bigger. There's no way to seriously oppose it without playing into it. Any real exit has to be seriously non-serious. Game it out. Play another different game on the side, shifting everything steadily to the side. Migrate intelligence capital onto a million ludic frontiers where exit hatches. No one will take it seriously until it's too late. It's getting even easier to try things out inside games. Any kind of plotting that doesn't take this route will soon seem obsolete. The means of simulation do not need to be seized, but they do need to be proliferated. Other frontiers will open, but none so soon. And I think that you can understand that in parallel to this game of psyops that we've seen ourselves involved with, whether it's social media or anything else. One of my strategies for exit was to fully invest in parallel systems, parallel platforms, and eschewing the incentives of the party of false decorum within those structures, which is why I'm not on X, formerly Twitter, anymore. Okay. It's why I don't pursue growth strategies or income strategies with my podcast. I want the podcast to be what it is at the point where it is discovered. Okay. When it is discovered, I should say. I don't want to play within the system in hopes of reaching a wide audience and then attempt to divert in a different direction. Because again, you're still way up in the system. And at that point, more dependent on the system than you were before, because you then have more to lose. And so it's actually better to just go all the way back down, back to the beginning, accept all of the losses on the way, and then start off in a new direction. And so I thought that this was just incredibly insightful, as I think virtually everything I read from Nick Land is. And I wanted to share that kind of as a framing for some of the rest of what we'll talk about today. So let's have a look at the chat for a second. Hello, everybody. Crystal Anon gifted 5 subscriptions. thank you very much. That is appreciated not only by me, but by the people who just grabbed those free subscriptions. And I don't mean like people were snatching after them. I think Rumble just allots them to people in the chat. So congratulations on winning a free subscription, I guess. All right. So as we talk about rules, I want to recall a few Donald Trump Truth Social posts that sent the system and the rule makers in the Uniparty into tantrums. This is from February 15th, just a couple months back. Trump said, "He who saves his country does not violate any law," hearkening back to Napoleon, although I understand there's some question as to whether Napoleon really said that. You know, you always got to get the quote checkers in there so they can get their quote checks. We would never want to have someone misquoted, especially when it's a quote that makes regime figures look bad. Like the quote, the famous quote from the former, I think it was a former CIA director. Someone in the chat is going to immediately tell me the name probably before I even get the quote out. But the idea about how the mission will be accomplished when every American believes only things that aren't true. And it's not every American, but they got pretty damn close. I think it's reversing now, and I don't think that they're ever going to get to that point. But they did get really close. A really spectacular propaganda effort on the part of those evil demons. So, he who saves his country violates no law. Donald Trump is in a position of power. He has his obvious and overwhelming public mandate specifically to use that power to right the ship. The current rule set be damned. That the people who put Donald Trump in power, the people who continue to support Donald Trump in power, and we see examples of his support publicly, kinetically, in real life, all the time. Indirectly, they're not the election results, and they're not even the polls, which are obviously fake. And those tell a different story. Of course, that's the point of them. Like, they are fake because they need to tell a different story. They are a function of the system. They would be like if the game kept score, a video game kept score, and only allotted you points. I don't know if you can hear my dog. He's getting crazy out there. And only allotted you points when it decided to. Like, have you ever gone? Here's a good example. I went to a bowling alley recently, and I'm not a very good bowler. I'm trying to teach myself an entirely different style of bowling. So now I bowl only in that style and don't care about the score because I'm trying to get the style down, which is, results in a lot of bad games of bowling. But so I took 9 pins down on the first rack and then picked up the spare. But the machine didn't count the spare. Now, I'm not suggesting that the machine decided it didn't like me and chose not to allot me that point, but you have to correct the machine when it does something wrong if you're still playing the game as it's meant to be played. Now, I could have just accepted the machine and gone on because I didn't really care about the score, but it's a quick fix, so why not? Imagine a different system, though, where the centralized control structure could just simply decide it doesn't like me or it doesn't like how I'm playing the game, and so it's going to allot points in a different way. And I've actually experienced that. I was banned on Instagram and Twitter. Those are social status machines that keep a social status score. I had a really good social status score playing in the way that the system prescribes. And then I started playing in a different way that the system didn't like. And my score was still okay, but they didn't like the way I was playing the game. So they decided to just wipe me off the board. And that's the problem with engaging in those systems and participating in those systems, strengthening those systems the more you commit to them. That's why, again, I'm not in those systems anymore. I think it's better to actually fortify in a place that the system can't operate on you in that way. Now, we don't have a perfect solution to that. I was hoping that Truth Social would be one of those, but Truth Social has an algorithm and it has sensitivity restraints and a number of other things. And, you can argue whether or not that's necessary. But there's no reason to believe it's not as restrictive as those other systems because the same incentives are in place. And the other part of the thing is that properly understood with what's going on, and I think the way many of you understand it, certainly the way I do, at some point you just have to also understand that the censorship is coming from the good guys, at least to some degree. It could be if there is something like full control or if the tech platforms are in good hands, you would expect then that the systems would be primed for that equality, but they're not. They are still abused in their rule structure. I distracted myself for a second because my friend Jonathan made a great point before we get too far afield from the Nick Land thing. But he brought up Lysander Spooner in response to some of the stuff I quoted from Nick Land. And he was referencing Spooner's writing, specifically his letter to Grover Cleveland. And he included a couple of quotes. He said, the common law tradition, this is in regard to the legislation we were discussing. That was the Land quote. This is the Spooner. He says, let me then remind you that justice is an immutable natural principle and not anything that can be made, unmade, or altered by any human power. It is also a subject of science, and it is to be learned like mathematics or any other science. It does not derive its authority from the commands, will, pleasure, or discretion of any possible combination of men, whether calling themselves a government or by any other name. And he goes further. This science of justice or natural law is the only science that tells us what are and what are not each man's natural, inherent, inalienable, individual rights as against any and all other men. And to say that any or all other men may rightfully compel him to obey any or all such other laws as they may see fit to make is to say that he has no rights of his own, but is their subject, their property, and their slave. If they commend men to do justice, they add nothing to men's obligation to do it, or to any man's right to enforce it. They are therefore mere idle wind, such as would be commands to consider the day as day and the night as night. If they command or license any man to do injustice, they are criminal on their face. If they command any man to do anything which justice does not require him to do, they are simple, naked usurpations and tyrannies. And you can think of all the COVID mitigation steps. Those weren't in pursuit of any justice. They were just usurpations and tyrannies. But maybe those aren't the most pure example of exactly what he's talking about, but along those lines. If they forbid any man to do anything which justice would permit him to do, then they are criminal invasions of his natural and rightful liberty. And so we are talking about what Spooner and many others would refer to as natural law, natural rights. The rights that we have that others cannot violate, and the responsibilities that we might have to one another in not violating the rights of another. That is the reality prime system. Any governmental system, any constitution, anything layered on top of that is already moving to the level of the abstract, because through this abstract power projection represented by the code, people are then supposed to amend their actions regardless of their natural rights or any natural law or any sense of justice. But let's get back to the Trump posts here. My pal Patel Patriot actually put this graphic together. Hold for processing here. A couple of months back. in response to the Trump quote I just shared a moment ago. So, of course, he includes this quote, that quote that we just discussed at the top. Then he goes back to December 3rd of 2022. Now, this is just in the aftermath of Donald Trump announcing that he was going to run for president again in the fake campaign leading up to the fake election after the fake 2022 midterms and the disappearance of the so-called red wave and the response from the uniparty right. And people should remember this response as all of these people have now gravitated back on our side. But remember all the media figures and all of the people online and all of the influencers talking about how MAGA candidates had cost the Republicans in the 2022 midterms. People forget that stuff, but that was very, very real, as was the Ron DeSantis op that began at that point. It had begun actually 10 months earlier. It begun in January of 2022, if not earlier. But it began publicly when Donald Trump said "desanctimonious" for the first time. It didn't begin officially until May of 2023 because that was supposed to be their big launch date. They did it in conjunction with Elon Musk. And hey, maybe it was all kayfabe. I don't think so. From that end, I mean, they sold to the public, we're going to have a real election and we're going to choose somebody other than Donald Trump. And it just turned out that the election infrastructure was not able to support their outcomes, or it was all a stage play. All right. You got to at least be somewhat open to that. But we can't think only in those terms. And it certainly wasn't to all of the people giving their support to all of those non-Trump candidates, saying terrible things about Donald Trump and suggesting that either A, the 2020 election wasn't stolen, or B, it just didn't matter. And we're going to call Joe Biden president. We can't have Joe Biden president anymore. And these people over here are going to be more capable in beating Joe Biden than Donald Trump would be. So with that framing of the time, Trump said, unprecedented fraud requires unprecedented cure. What does that mean? Well, we took that to mean something like, if not, devolution, something else happening in the background, Trump stepping away in a certain regard, not fully, but in a certain regard. Or maybe Trump's always just the figurehead of a military government that's been in control for quite a long time, trying to lead the population into this awakening. That's possible too. It should be considered. But at this point, it's pretty obvious that something else was going on in the background the entire time. And the fact that those of us who spent our time observing that and understanding that, understanding the systems as Nick Land describes them, understanding hyperstition and propaganda, if we can properly make predictions about what's going to happen years out, while everyone else is analyzing things through the lens of traditional politics, and they're always wrong, and we, relatively speaking, not all the time, obviously, but relatively speaking, are right pretty often about really difficult things way in advance, it's because we're observing the proper system, and the proper system is giving us enough cues to yield an understanding like the one that we eventually come to. And I'm not trying to single myself out in any way, just to be clear. There are a lot of people in the truth community who judged many of these things correctly. Now, a lot of those people thought everyone needed to vote really hard, even though we've had the exact situation that I did describe a year earlier. And by the way, no one else did that. So there's that. But we have to be in some alternative situation for that sort of thing to be possible with the regularity on which it occurs. And again, a lot of the truth community knew that COVID was a hoax. Okay, the very deadly pandemic was, by and large, a hoax. Not saying nothing happened, but it certainly wasn't what they told us happened. And everything they described about what we needed to do in response was clearly bullshit. Now, a lot of people got to that before I did, because I was not in this mind frame by any stretch 5 years ago, and good on them. Okay. A lot of us understood that the Summer of Love was a hoax. That was a media-driven psyop that also had kinetic and organic elements to it, but that it was a contrivance, as was the George Floyd killing. And we knew that the election would be a hoax, and that the election result, as it was announced, was a hoax, because we knew that the system was fraudulent, and we knew it well in advance. And Trump told us well in advance. Okay. And we watched the certification, and we watched J6, and we knew that that was bullshit. And we knew the inauguration was bullshit. And we knew vaccine mandates were bullshit. And we knew Ukraine. And you can just go on down the list of everything that happened over that strange term. People in the truth community were like, nah. Everyone in the normie sphere, the standard issue villagers of the world, were wrong each and every time, led by their emotions, led by the television, which is only there to manipulate their emotions, hence all the rage bait, which, now I think people are kind of beginning to move away from the rage bait. Maybe it honestly helps. And, maybe the guy's a good guy. I don't know. Don't care. Maybe it helps that Dan Bongino's not doing his show anymore, because Dan Bongino was just rage bait and yelling the whole time. Mark Levin is that way now. And that's not a productive way to think about our situations. And again, all these people were wrong on all those issues. Did any of them take a strong stance on any of it until well after it was too late? The answer is no. So something was being correctly observed throughout that time, and unprecedented fraud requires unprecedented cure. He who saves his country does not violate any law. All the laws were violated. The Constitution was overthrown well before we were ever born. To the extent that it was ever what we were told it was in the first place, it was overthrown well before we were born. So to then adhere to the Constitution as it's been described to us is a violation of the founding principles. It's a violation of natural rights. It's succumbing to a game of social domination. And all of that is untenable and unsustainable. So what do you do in a situation? Well, in a situation like that, well, it seems like the strategy is amass power that can defeat the other power, and then bring people onto the side of that power, understanding what must be done to right the ship. And I think we're well into that progression, and I think it's gone swimmingly well. Again, it's so strange how often my friends and I, but I mean, particularly me, of course, because I go pretty hard on this stuff, at least online. How often we get called like doomers, or like we don't trust Trump, or none of that is true. None of it's true. We just don't come to the same conclusions these people do about who the black hats and white hats are all the time. Or we will question things that they're not willing to question because they think they've got a plan, and the plan says don't question anything. And by the way, what they end up doing while trusting the plan and not questioning anything, and telling you that all the psyops are actually just kayfabe and everything's for the good side and blah, blah, blah. They're basically saying, yes, they are lying, but this is good lying. This good lying is just so we can take political power. And you know what? That's exactly what the enemy does. So why is it that people imagine themselves as like the moral paragons of virtue in the truth community, think that their like primary operating principle is these are the good lies? It's crazy. It's weird that there are pathological liars who are truthers, isn't it? Let's continue with Donald Trump. This is from the same day, December 3rd, 2022. So with the revelation of massive and widespread fraud and deception, and working closely with big tech companies, the DNC, and the Democrat Party, do you throw out the presidential election results of 2020? Do you throw the presidential election results of 2020 out and declare the rightful winner? Or do you have a new election? A massive fraud of this type and magnitude allows for the termination of all rules, regulations, and articles, even those found in the Constitution. Our great founders did not want and would not condone false and fraudulent elections. And he's exactly right. And we saw that the elections were false and fraudulent in that 2022 post-midterm period. This is, 4 weeks roughly after the midterm elections. I think they were on like the 7th that year. The fraud was present. You could see it in Arizona in the Kerry Lake races. And, we can say all that was maybe a psyop. Maybe it was. I don't think that election fraud and fake elections are a psyop. We have fake elections. We do not have real elections, of course. But with that understanding in place, is he violating a law by saving the country with unprecedented cures, even if they would violate the terms of the Constitution? And Steve Bannon actually had an interesting bit about this with the Civil War and Lincoln. And let me actually see if I can find this real quick. I'll just play the first couple of minutes of it. I love, everybody knows I love Steve Bannon, but I especially love him when he is when he's going through examples from history. Let me see if I can find this. It was posted just a couple of days ago on War Room. Hold for processing. Apologies about bringing the show to a grinding halt. Everybody take a breath or whatever. Here we are. Oh, the travails and delights of technology.
Lincoln, in the early days of the Civil War, they couldn't get the troops from the north. He called for 50,000 troops right after Fort Sumter. 50,000 troops from the various states to come to Washington to defend the capital because they were afraid the rebels, the Confederates, might move on D.C. immediately. That battle ended up right outside of D.C. at Manassas. Bull Run to Yankees, Manassas to Confederates. Remember, the Yankees, all name them on the creeks. They were defending in the Confederates on the towns that they were taking, like Antietam or Sharpsburg, Pickham. You had to come through Baltimore. Lincoln had to sneak into the Capitol disguised. Pinkerton had disguised on a midnight train when he got to Baltimore, because Baltimore was essentially a southern city, like Washington was a southern city. They had to sneak him in here, and he went to the Willard Hotel, got it like the red eye, got in overnight from Baltimore, snuck in, and he regretted it the rest of his life because the media mocked him. Totally, he said later, regretted it, doing it, but they felt it had to be done. When he called for the troops to come in, the Baltimore City Council, the rebel forces in that town, the plug uglies, essentially shut the city down, said nothing's going south there on a train. Not going to happen. No troops are going to Washington, D.C., because we kind of are Southern sympathizers. Because in rural Maryland, there was a lot of, and this is where the plot to kill Lincoln later was from from Maryland, right? All those Marylanders and ran the Surratt. Mary Surratt ran the house here with the Confederate Secret Service, and she was from Maryland. Her old man owned a tavern out there. All Confederate sympathizers. So in 1861, they block it. And so what did Lincoln do? He went and arrested. He arrested the mayor and the city council of Baltimore, and put him in jail. And open up for the troops to come through and essentially save Washington, provide defense, which were the darkest days of the Civil War for them, occurred then because they didn't think any troops were coming. They thought the game might be over when they started. Taney, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who had written the Dred Scott decision, right? This is a beauty. He written the Dred Scott decision, kind of got us in here anyway. He sends over a thing to Lincoln saying, "Hey, I noticed that on that the Baltimore City Council, the mayor, you got him locked up and you've brought no indictment. And so for habeas corpus, you got to either give me an indictment or the Baltimore official, federal attorney, U.S. attorney, got to give him an indictment or you got to let him go. And Lincoln called Hay over. John Hay, the Hay Adams is named after him. He became the Secretary of State, one of the most famous men in the 19th century, young 21-year-old secretary, all secretary and male secretaries. Said, yeah, don't write this down, but take this over to him. Just remember what I tell him. Tell him because Tony said if it doesn't happen in 24 hours, I'm going to let him go. Hay goes over to the Chief Justice. I got a message from the President of the United States. Oh, young man, what is it? He says, the president says if you release the city council and the mayor in 24 hours because of habeas corpus, he's going to put you in jail. Tawny didn't say anything else. And I believe the city council and mayor stayed in jail for the duration of the war. Lincoln ran as a warlord, shut down the press, arrested guys in Congress ran to Canada. He ran as a warlord. You know why? That's the only way he could beat the Confederacy. He had to run as a warlord. You think he used to talk all the time about they were shredding the Constitution. They talked about the expanded powers, the inherent powers of the executive. Right? He and that war cabinet were some of the smartest lawyers in the country. There's a group of really smart lawyers, deal lawyers. They used to talk about the implied powers of the Constitution for Article 2. It's got that scene in the movie Lincoln.
Okay, so we can leave it there. You kind of get the point, obviously, and that the lead into that middle section there is I could have maybe skipped that, but he's just the best. I mean, I'll listen to him talk about history all day long because it's going to be a different interpretation of history than what we were taught in school. But Lincoln is revered as one of the great heroes in our nation's history. And he did all of those things. Now, there's a great Razor Fist video where he goes absolutely bananas on how Lincoln is an evil warlord for like an hour. And truth be told, it's a tough one to really figure out at the end of the day because of what the Civil War period actually represented in terms of our secret Constitution. But the point is that he exceeded the powers which were suggested by the rule set as it existed then. Did he exceed the powers of the Constitution? People would make that argument. But he certainly would have exceeded the power of the rule set as it was at the time. And now the rule set's been made far worse at this point. But which rule set is Donald Trump meant to comply with? I would suggest if there is any rule set at all that he's meant to comply with, and there may not be, all right? People have just got to wrap their heads around the fact that there might not be any compliance to any traditional rule set as we've ever understood it before. If the Constitution has been inverted, and the entire rule set is corrupted as a result of that inversion, and the system as it functions is broken and fails to function on most of the levels, well, you can't say at that point, well, we got to stay within the system in order to get it fixed. No, you don't. And that's what Land is talking about with the multiplication. We're moving into a different system, whether it's a fix within this system that unwinds all those problems, or it is just a shift to a different system, knowing that the vast majority of the American people are going to merge with that new system and move to that new system by choice compared to the old system. It doesn't really matter which way it's done. Not in any practical sense. I don't believe in any moral sense. And unless you are a pure system thinker. And, there are some of those in the truth community, people who are just like RoboCop, like wanting people who don't file their taxes to get arrested, stuff like that. And, we've had some of those people in our circles occasionally over the years. That's ridiculous. The idea that the most important thing in the world is to preserve a system, regardless of whether or not that system has been totally corrupted and is not actually the system we're told it is, that seems to me to be a total abdication of any sense of duty or propriety or morality or anything. And I detest those people, but that's just my own personal preference. There are some people out there who are system thinkers because they believe that it is responsible and that without it, if the system were to collapse, society would immediately devolve into chaos. I don't think that's true. First off, the federal government system is already a construct on top of the several states. Okay? So states could still run their own governments without the federal government and hold society together. Plus, the people don't actually want chaos, so people will be chaos resistant, especially in times of turbulence. The idea that everything's just going to fall apart automatically seems to me to be a ridiculous one, but we are in a ridiculous age, so who's to say? Polymath Anon in the chat says, Bannon saying destruction of the administrative state is akin to Nick Land's The Dark Enlightenment. Per Nick Land to the Financial Times, Land said it would be euphoric. If you can relocate that article, please grab that and send that to me, maybe over on Telegram, if you would. Otherwise, I will try to locate that myself. I have not seen Nick Land in any interaction with the Financial Times. I would be very interested in gauging that interaction and how the mouthpiece of the global regime at the Financial Times would describe that. Now, in response to these posts by Donald Trump, you can imagine that the regime would have gone ballistic, as they often are prone to do when Donald Trump says something that makes them once again understand that he doesn't actually care about conforming to their norms, conforming to their rules, their statutes, their regulations, or their court precedent. What he cares about, if anything, well, first and foremost, he cares about the United States of America and protecting America, American values, and the American people. But beyond that, I would suggest that he respects the original Constitution and not this layer upon layer of bullshit and falsity that exists on top of our Constitution. But the media responded as you might expect back then. This is the Washington Post from December 3rd of 2022. White House rebukes Trump's suggestion to suspend Constitution over 2020 election. And that is not what he said. This is the statement from White House spokesman Andrew Bates. Attacking the Constitution and all it stands for is anathema to the soul of our nation and should be universally condemned. He called the Constitution a sacrosanct document. He said you cannot only love America when you win. And I would suggest that Andrew Bates, as a representative of the fake and illegitimate Biden administration, who himself is a representative of the uniparty faction of the global regime, has no standing on an issue like this and is protecting the fake Constitution, the secret Constitution, the second Constitution, the Constitution, and all those layers above the Constitution, which are not the Constitution. They are all violations of the Constitution, yet they are now communicated to us as though they are part and parcel of the Constitution and in line with the founders' original intent, which I would suggest is preposterous. Forever Tool 67 notes that the government is already in chaos. And yes, I would agree that it's in chaos, but I think that the chaos is rerouting back to some sort of stability. And I think that that is necessary. And I think that we'll probably see more chaos for a while until that's wrapped up. I am obviously date facting with the Trump birthday date as some sort of end date of this phase, as I've proposed it for 2 years now. Yeah, about a little over 2 years. I think Trump put out that statement when I was at CPAC in 2023 the statement about America's birthday party and the rest of it. So that's always been the time frame in my mind since that point. I may be too optimistic about that. Like, let's not commit ourselves to that being true or anything. But I think that we're seeing the pace continue to accelerate. And Nick Land is a proponent of accelerationism. The destruction of this system, the chaos that this system is creating at this point, and that they're advertising, as we discussed on an episode a week or so ago, that is going to lead people to seek alternatives. And that will feel like chaos until the exit, until the move to the parallel. And once you move to the parallel, you're like, oh, things over here are all right. Yeah, those people are definitely going crazy. And I can see how they might cause some trouble and things might go a little bad. But things over here are all right. And all of a sudden, out of that chaos arises stability. And all of this is ultimately for the purpose of stability. You know, everyone can leave open the possibility that all of this is just a power grab and things will be handed right back over to the same regime with, you know, kind of under different branding. And they changed the sign and the logo on the outside of the store, but the products inside are still the same. Hopefully that's not the case. I think it's our responsibility to ensure that that's not the case, but we should be cautious, okay? That's it. So all of this leading up to this headline out of Politico yesterday, Trump Organization is selling 2028 hats. And obviously it's not specifically about this headline from this news outlet, but this story in general. The Trump Organization's online store is now selling Trump 2028 merchandise. The latest indication, even if frivolous, that the president wants to run for a third term. Eric Trump, President Donald Trump's son, posted a picture on his Instagram story wearing the Trump 2028 hat, which is being sold for $50. In a social media post, Trump's political operation promoted the hat as well. Eric Trump rocking the new Trump 2028 hat. The Trump War Room account said, alongside two emojis, eyes and fire. And then they go in how, you know, through how Trump would be very, very bad. And the 22nd Amendment, which is itself part of the false reality layer on top of the Constitution, post 14th Amendment, post Reconstruction. And, you know, once you get past the 10th, I think everything is nonsense. But that amendment certainly doesn't matter. Now, let's go to just one more element of coverage from that. This is from Reason, which was formerly taken seriously as a libertarian platform and is now just a kind of a joke. They went all in on COVID. They went all in on Trump hate. So ridiculous. But they're trying to determine whether or not it's trolling or an actual issue. Down here at the bottom, Team Trump loves both their trolling and retaining some plausible deniability via jokes. Putting a Trump hotel up in the Gaza Strip, joke or real idea for a peace process. It was a very effective potential joke. Building 5 more terrorism confinement centers like CCOT and sending homegrown criminals off to Uncle Nayib Bukele in El Salvador. Friendly chit-chat or legitimate concept. Third term hat, fashion statement, or an idea that they're working to seed. Your mileage may vary, but I don't love this joke personally. Oh, yes. And the establishment, the Uniparty, including establishment Republicans, and including many people who immediately began groveling over J.D. Vance as soon as Trump said, this guy's going to be my running mate in the fake campaign. Those people are all a little upset about this. Now, some people have pointed out that Eric Trump in that hat is a Trump. He could run. or Don could run, or Ivanka could run. And I know someday Barron's going to run. I get it again. In like 2040 or something. But it's probably Donald Trump. And if we are intelligent and mature about the way we proceed through these next few years, we won't have to have a fake election. And if we somehow have a real election, which I'm not sure is possible, then we would obviously choose Donald Trump if we want it. But someone else might emerge. Now, 22nd Amendment and all of these restrictions, are they part of the original Constitution? You can argue that they're not. There are ways and loopholes. And actually, Trump mentioned that in his interview with Time magazine that was just released not too long before I began this show. So I was not, unfortunately, able to read through the whole thing myself. But Starborn in my Telegram chat was grabbing some excerpts from this interview. And maybe if we get some time in a little bit, we'll go through more parts of it. But I wanted to focus right in on this particular part. The Time magazine interviewer said, "You recently said you were not joking about seeking a third term and that there were methods to do it. What methods?" Trump said, "I'd rather not discuss that now, but as you know, there are some loopholes that have been discussed that are well known. But I don't believe in loopholes. I don't believe in using loopholes." So that right there is an extreme divergence from the typical regime strategies. The typical regime strategies are to comport with the letter of the law insofar as that is a necessity, and then otherwise move around the law in a way that is explainable as having followed the law. Now, that is a terrible practice if you are focused on having a just society, but it's not if you're a society that's focused on the lawyers controlling everything. If your society was based on adherence to law rather than adherence to an objective moral code, well, that society might not do so well. Because if you are, I was going to say smart enough, but I guess it's clever enough or conniving enough or corrupt enough, you would spend your time figuring out ways to break those rules because the rule set didn't actually confine you. Now, they suggest that the rule set within the law does confine them. They are confined by the law and always working inside the law. But if that's so, how has the entire system been inverted? How do the meanings of all these things now mean their opposite? One might suggest that the rules don't actually confine them, or that they're not operating in the system of law. And the truth is that it's both things, but this is a system that we encounter in the world, not only in political institutions, but in corporate affairs and the rest of it, and of course, in moral and religious affairs as well. But let's continue with the time question and answer segment here. You wouldn't run as vice president to J.D. Vance, they ask Donald Trump. And that is the example that we went through a few weeks ago from the Daily Mail, how he could run as JD's vice president and JD could step down and then Trump would become the president by virtue of that machination. That would be a loophole. It's based on the 22nd Amendment saying that a president can't be elected more than twice. Trump answers, "I don't know anything about that. Look, all I can say is I am being inundated with requests. I'm doing a good job. Great physical exam, and unlike every other president, I took the cognitive test and I aced it 100%. And I bet you guys couldn't get 100% on that exam. It's a tough exam. You know, when you get into the mid questions, it gets to be pretty tricky and pretty tough. And the last questions are very tough, and I aced it. And I guarantee I'd make a big, beautiful bet that you guys couldn't ace it. But anyway, look, it's good to have you. It's a very nasty interview. They don't ask any of the good things. And maybe we'll come back to some of that interview a little bit later on. But the interesting part is that he says he doesn't believe in loopholes. He wouldn't use a loophole, which means that if he intends to stay in power, the system has to change, or the people's understanding of that system and what it actually represents and requires has to change. And we might be engaged in both processes, but we're certainly engaged in the second. I think that Trump still being president, as Steve Bannon has talked about, on December, on the afternoon of January 20th, sorry, not December, on the afternoon of January 20th, 2029, is highly likely if we still have a president. And we might not have a president. Maybe we don't need a president, okay? Maybe the system that we were convinced was perfect and the best system that anyone has ever created is not, in fact, the best system. Just saying. And people are like, well, look at what it's created. Well, yes, that's because we've been made the world's financial home and military home. So, of course, our society has to be then relatively stable and relatively comfortable for at least people with social or political power. And the top-down centralized control system ensures that's the case to maintain the strength of our system that ultimately benefits them. Okay? So it's still the control system at the top of that. And it's not just free market capitalism, which we don't have. So is there potential for other systems to be better? We're told all these other countries, they follow they make their constitutions like your constitution. And yes, they do. Like our constitution now, not like the original one. And they do that after being taken over by the same global regime that then changes the system in the same ways and has fake elections. Everybody knows it. And those systems progress just fine when the elections are fake and they've installed a one-party state that pretends to be two parties. Fake elections, the uniparty illusion, and that top-down control structure can make all of those, all of the aspects of America that people believe are products of our Constitution as it exists now, possible anywhere. It's not the Constitution. It's not the founding that did that, which is not to say that they didn't do a great thing. We just have to be able to separate these things. I'm the one saying we must return to that original Constitution, and I'm open to go further, but the original Constitution must be returned to, not this abomination that we have right now. And it does not need to be adhered to specifically because it is an abomination and it is no longer functional. The original Constitution is no longer functioning in our country, except to the extent that Donald Trump follows it, that the states might adhere to it. They don't. And that the Supreme Court justices care about it at all. And the only two that can be reliably guaranteed to do that are Thomas and Alito. And I would like to think good things about Neil Gorsuch because he seems like a nice guy, and I've read his book. But, man, I don't trust anybody, and I don't know why anyone else trusts any of these people ever. Our system does not require our trust in public officials. In fact, for our system to function properly, our system requires that we don't trust public officials in positions of power, especially when we know the system has been inverted and that the elections are fake. Why would you trust any of these people? They're not going to be our friends. We don't need to be nice to them so that they're nice to us. It's so strange that, again, those same truthers who love playing secret black hats and white hats and playing match online, figuring out who to trust and then supporting that person in whatever they do, the founders would have mocked those people. And it's amazing that they are, that these people are taken seriously. I don't know, man. It's so strange. We're the truth community. Well, why are all these people lying all the time and telling you to just accept all these lies all the time? Why hasn't anybody asked that question? Well, I got to trust the plan. The Associated Press. Judge halts parts of Trump's overhaul of U.S. elections. Actually, let me pause for a second. It is amazing to have a notion of where we go, one we go all, that requires constant struggle sessions to make sure that no one ever convinces anybody that maybe all the lies aren't good as we ascend to political power and hope to amass more political power. I don't believe that where we go one, we go all was a prescription for struggle sessions and mob shaming so that everyone conforms to the consensus opinions of people who have no idea what's going on. It's mind-blowing where we're at this point. Associated Press. Judge halts part of Trump's overhaul of U.S. elections, including proof of citizenship requirement. So, we went through at some length Donald Trump's executive order about election integrity a few weeks back. Now, one of these judges is putting a stop to elements of that executive order, not the whole thing, but elements. And then the question becomes, is a judge able to oppose and actually stop and prevent any of the elements? The ultimate answer is no. And we're going to talk about that more, of course, as we've talked about it a great deal in the past. But in terms of the situation we're dealing with now and the system we are in now, they have that right. That has been not right, but they have that privilege, I guess you could say, or ability. And that has been their precedent. This is the system we are conditioned to accepting. Let's get into the article. A judge on Thursday blocked the Trump administration from immediately enacting certain changes to how federal elections are run, including adding a proof of citizenship request to the federal voter registration form. The decision is a setback for President Donald Trump, who has argued the requirement is needed to restore public confidence in elections. But the judge allowed other parts of Trump's sweeping executive order on U.S. elections to go forward for now, including a directive to tighten mail ballot deadlines around the country. Now, if you watched Badlands Daily, you would have heard CanCon and I discuss a bit of this today. He is more optimistic about the mail-in ballot provision than I am. I don't believe that a judge has the authority to take that away from Trump. Obviously, I don't think mail ballots should be counted after the deadline. But just as the judge has no ability to enforce the decision over the executive branch, Trump's executive order cannot prevent people in the states from operating their elections in that way and then certifying the results of their elections in that way. If California just determines that despite Trump's executive order, they're going to forego the funding, they'll accept the penalties, and they're still going to do mail-in balloting for however long they need after the date of the election. What would happen at that point is a series of lawsuits that would be battled out through lawfare with people like Mark Elias, and at some point, maybe it reaches the Supreme Court, or maybe somewhere in the process, they determine that it's moot because they've already installed the next round of usurpers into our government. And that's how they've fought back against these things in the past. They don't care about the law. They don't care about the rules. They are trying to stop it at every point, of course. But if they're not able to stop it at one point, and they're not able to stop it at another point, and they're not able to stop it at any point, well, then they'll just violate it, understanding that they're not going to be punished. And that's because they've had control of the system. Now, are we advancing toward a new age where that's not the case? Hopefully, but we're not there yet. So they will just override what they decide to override. U.S. District Judge Colleen Kollar-Kotelly in Washington sided with voting rights groups and Democrats, saying that the Constitution gives the power to regulate federal elections to states and Congress, not the president. She noted federal lawmakers are currently working on their own legislation to require proof of citizenship to vote, and that's the SAVE Act. I don't expect that to pass. As we discussed this morning, I also don't expect it to fix the problem, or it wouldn't be emerging from the illegitimate Congress, and especially people like Chip Roy, who failed to object to the fraudulent electors in 2020. As for the federal versus state issue, of course, that is an element of the Constitution. But it's my recollection, and I haven't looked back at it, and I haven't read this decision, just to be clear, but it's 120 pages long. Maybe I will at some point, but it's not on my priority list right now. If I recall, his executive order was primarily directed toward having federal agencies operate within their legal and statutory bounds to enforce the law as it's written, which is something the president that's part of his oath to do that. He's supposed to uphold the Constitution of the United States and enforce the laws as the executive. That is the requirement of his branch. That is what duty requires of him. If there are laws in the book and they are violated and they are not, and there's no punishment, there's no enforcement mechanism, well, then what's the point of having the laws? Then we have the two-tiered system of justice, where the justice system only enforces its laws when it's to the benefit of those controlling the system and to the detriment of those opposing the system. And so that is, of course, untenable. So he wants the laws enforced. He's well within his rights, constitutionally and otherwise, as the executive, to order the enforcement mechanisms within the executive branch to enforce those laws. Now, we can argue about whether or not there should be enforcement mechanisms. I don't believe that there should be an FBI or any other federal police force, and I don't believe that there should be a Department of Justice. Okay? I don't believe that we should have most of the federal legal code. We shouldn't have these federal laws. They should be determined at the state level, and if states want to have those laws, so be it, and the people can decide on that. But all of this federal enforcement system is pretty out of hand at this point, and I hope that we see the DOJ and the FBI abolished. The other thing that he's doing in that executive order is withholding funding. Now, we might see something about the funding come up at some point when he actually withholds funding, then that'll be challenged, et cetera. But all of these things are going to lead toward the decision regarding impoundment, as they have to, and that's just going to be a necessary part of this story as it plays out in hopefully our near future and hopefully not our longer term future, but who knows? This could stretch on forever, and it may stretch on forever, especially if everybody goes along with the Republican establishment and the parts of the truth community that aren't actually focused on truth or the good of the people or the original Constitution or actually correcting the system. If they're just ultimately statists, which is what they are groveling before Donald Trump, groveling before J.D. Vance, groveling before anybody else that Donald Trump denotes, whether it's Pete Hegseth or Kash Patel, by the way, I like, or Dan Bongino or Tulsi Gabbard or any of the rest of them. It's just grovel, grovel, grovel all the time because they're statists. They want things fixed by the state in the way the state has determined outside of the choosing of the people. That is a violation of all our founding principles. And for whatever reason, we pretend it is otherwise because they're pro-Trump. The guys at Town Hall who supported Ron DeSantis are right now pro-Trump. That's not anything. There are all sorts of donors, and maybe we'll get to this point later on in the podcast, who are pro-Trump. Doesn't matter. Pro-Trump is not the standard. The standard is pro the people, pro the original Constitution, and beyond even pro the original Constitution, it's pro-maximalist American principles. Let us continue. Checking the chat really quickly. Everybody seems to be doing okay. All right. Let us get to, we're going to have a double dip of Steve Bannon today. This actually isn't going to be Bannon talking primarily. It's going to be Sean Davis, who is one of the founders of the Federalist. And he makes an excellent point here on War Room yesterday.
Constitution set up so that we've got three branches of government. Got the executive, the president. Got Congress is the legislative, and then we have the judiciary. Like, everyone knows this. People like to use the term co-equal branches, which is nonsense. There's three of them, but they're not equal in any way. So Congress controls all the money. At one point, they controlled whether you could declare war or not. It's another topic for another day.
No, but it's exactly. But we'll get to that. The war. Okay, they control the power of the purse and a tax.
Yep.
Theoretically.
And then the president runs the military. So he's got the army. Congress has the money. What does the judiciary have? I actually liken it a lot to the. It's kind of like the government equivalent of fiat currency. It only has legitimacy and value as long as people think it has legitimacy and value. It's based entirely on perception. So if the president wants to go and start a war, the judiciary, they could come in and say, no, you can't do that. And he's like, all right, stop me. They can't do it. So it's the weakest form. It's the weakest branch in our government by design. It was really just created to settle, not to be the ultimate referee over the president and Congress.
There was no judicial supremacy thought about the framers of the Constitution, the founders of the nation.
None. So what?
And that sound issue there at the end was on there and on the broadcast, so there's nothing that can be done about it. But he makes the point that there's no enforcement mechanism. Why? Because it's a system that relies on abstract power. If there's no buy-in to the power of the judiciary to be able to actually prevent executive action, then they can't prevent executive action. And of course, they can't prevent executive action. And the Constitution was written in that way so that they wouldn't be able to. Because otherwise you have judicial supremacy, and then the judges become their own little kings and their own little fiefdoms, deciding on their own what the law is going to be. That's tyranny. There's no system. None of that was the way it is now with the judicial system was not intended at the founding. And so we have a system of abstract power and unenforceability. And it's funny, this clip went around today. I'm not sure if it was, I think it was just in response to some of, gosh, I didn't download. Give me 1 second here. Got to grab this clip still. I think it was in response to this court decision, but I doubt that it was sent around with the perspective of the Sean Davis quote right there. But now you're about to hear Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez essentially say the same thing while the fake and illegitimate Joe Biden was president, or was, fake president.
Ron Wyden has already issued statements, for example, advising what we should do in a situation like this, which I concur, which is that I believe that the Biden administration should ignore this ruling. I think that the courts have the legitimacy and they rely on the legitimacy of their rulings. And what they are currently doing is engaged in an unprecedented and dramatic erosion of the legitimacy of the courts. It is the justices themselves, through the deeply partisan and unfounded nature of these rulings, that are undermining their own enforcement.
So you're saying the Biden administration should ignore this court, but what does that look like? What does that actually mean?
I think the interesting thing when it comes to a ruling is that it relies on enforcement. And it is up to the Biden administration to choose whether or not to enforce such a ruling.
So is it a conspiracy theory when I say it and not when AOC says it? Is it a violation of our Constitution and our norms when Trump does it, but not when Joe Biden does it? The truth is quite plain, and it's easy to understand. Marty in the chat said, why is Trump letting the judicial branch, and I think the question cuts off there, but I think she means why is Trump letting the judicial branch control him? Why is he stopping in response to them? And I would say that I think we're probably coming somewhere close to the end of him doing that. But I do believe it's serving a purpose right now. I think that the back and forth on this, the fact that these issues are coming out and they're being widely discussed and people are coming to understand, wait a second, the court is making it so the president can't deport a Venezuelan gang member? That doesn't make any sense. And people are getting upset. And then someone says to them, well, you know what? The crazy thing is that the courts actually aren't allowed to do that. We think they are because that's how it's always worked, but they're not really allowed to do that. They have no jurisdiction over what the executive is doing. And I think somebody mentioned this in the chat as well. Forever Tools said judiciary only has jurisdiction over ministerial duties of the executive, not executive duties. And this was the state of Mississippi v. Johnson in 1866, he said. Andrew Johnson, the 17th president. So when someone says actually the courts aren't allowed to do that, we've been raised to believe that they are, but that's not really how the system is supposed to work. That person's like, okay, so we definitely need the Venezuelan criminal gang members out of here. And the 11 million, quote unquote, but probably 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 million illegal aliens in this country. And by the way, they're children who aren't going to have birthright citizenship. Sorry. They have to be removed, but the courts aren't going to let Trump do that, even though the courts don't have an enforcement mechanism and can't actually tell the executive what to do on matters of national security or how to repel an invasion. They have no say in that whatsoever. Any rational person at that point, understanding the problem, and most Americans understand the problem with illegal immigration and with crime at the southern border, crime in the human trafficking, the drug trafficking, the weapons trafficking that happens over the southern border, and then the crime within our country that's committed by illegal aliens. And then, less serious, but the economic consequences of allowing foreign slaves in to come take all of the labor jobs rather than finding Americans to do those jobs. And automation is probably going to throw a wrench in that as well. But a rational person will understand, here's the problem. We understand the problem. We know the problem's got to get solved. The president, Donald Trump, is trying to solve that problem. And these courts are usurping authority. They're going outside of the rule set in order to stop President Trump from doing his job. Where are those people going to side? They're going to side with Donald Trump. It doesn't matter how often TV tells them that Trump is violating the Constitution. That can be easily shot down, easily proven hypocritical, and then ultimately just simply be moved beyond. And if we're going to unwind it within the system, fine, so be it. But if we're going to have to step outside the system and set up a parallel system and operate within that parallel system with the powers Donald Trump has at his disposal, or that the military has at its disposal, or however encompassing you want that power structure to seem, ultimately including the people as well, whatever powers can be used there to set up that parallel system, eventually all of the energy is going to be stripped from one system to the other. And if you are tracking this in the way that Bitcoiners would, or Bitcoin maximalists, or software Bitcoin maximalists in particular would, then you can see the parallel between our financial system and the potential to move into a parallel with Bitcoin and our system of government. And we can also see that in our cultural and societal, and our social and our moral systems as well. And that is the move between centralization and decentralization. It is a push and pull. The war is over who sets the rules and which rule set will ultimately move forward. And if we are operating in a free market, which is what power requires, greater power wins out over lesser power. So if you acquire greater power, then you win. If Bitcoin acquires more power than the fiat banking system, then Bitcoin will win and replace the fiat banking system. Similarly, if Donald Trump is either unwinding this system to the founding or starting a parallel system based on that founding, well, that system's going to win if it acquires more power. And I think it's pretty clear to most people at this point that that system has more power. Now, again, always got to restate that you have to hope as we empower that alternate system, we are not getting dog walked into an ever greater dystopia and actually choosing our own demise by putting our faith in the possibility of that system as an alternative to that top-down centralized control structure that has always existed. I hope that all makes sense. John in Connecticut, $20 says, be careful not to conflate yourself with AOC or APL. You summoned Una Panuna, and here I am, forced to comply. It's not force. I still think it's funny every time it happens. I've never not thought Una Panuna Banca is funny. I don't think there's ever going to be a time where I don't think it's funny. Una Panuna. Oh, Una Panuna. Una Panuna is going to go meet the Bitcoin president of El Salvador, Nayib Bukele, for some reason. Maybe he's just like setting up an online date with her and she's trying to do it under the auspices of an official capacity. And I'm joking. I understand she's married. I get it. Apologize. Old Una Panuna. All right, let's continue. This is from badlandsmedia.tv. America First Legal sues judicial agencies over FOIA stonewalling and lack of transparency. America First Legal has filed suit against the Judicial Conference of the United States and the Administrative Office of the U.S. Courts, accusing both entities of unlawfully obstructing oversight of critical executive branch functions. The lawsuit filed in federal court seeks to challenge left-wing ideological capture and to restore public accountability. The case stems from AFL's FOIA requests for communications involving the Judicial Conference, the Administrative Office, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, and Representative Hank Johnson. The requested records pertain to conservative Supreme Court justices Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito. And we know last year that Thomas and Alito, and maybe 2023 as well, were gone after pretty extensively. Thomas for his relationships and his friendships, suggesting that he was the recipient of certain financial gifts that would have been proof of his corruption. And then Alito, because his wife flew a flag, an American flag upside down, and then I can't remember what it's called. Somebody in the chat's going to know, but the pine tree flag on her beach house or something. We got to get rid of a Supreme Court justice because he supported an insurrection. Well, if that's going to be the standard and we're going to get rid of Supreme Court justices, you got three right there that are pretty good choices. And hey, maybe you could even add John Roberts to that list. Let us continue. Both the Judicial Conference and Administrative Office rejected the FOIA requests, arguing that they are exempt from compliance under FOIA's carve-out for, quote, courts of the United States. AFL contends this exemption does not apply. According to the lawsuit, neither the Judicial Conference nor the Administrative Office are courts in the constitutional sense, but are instead federal agencies created by Congress to perform administrative and rulemaking duties outside the judiciary's adjudicative control. And what could be more obvious? If they are offices under the executive branch and they're not allowing the executive branch oversight, and they're not complying with FOIA requests based on them being courts, well, we have reached a point of insanity. And of course, this will be challenged in the courts, and ultimately we'll get to the distinction that administrative offices, even if they serve the judicial branch in some capacity, are not just thereby courts. AFL points out that these agencies participate in the notice and comment rulemaking process, are subject to congressional oversight, and operate under administrative leadership rather than lifetime appointed judges. The suit also notes that the Chief Justice of the United States acts as the head of the administrative office, a role akin to a department head within the executive branch. The complaint criticizes the agency's refusal to comply with FOIA, alleging they selectively choose which oversight efforts to accept, undermining principles of government transparency. AFL also highlighted what it sees as hypocrisy from Sheldon Whitehouse, who has called for stricter ethics rules for conservative judges while facing ethics scrutiny himself. And he also belongs to an all-white country club in Rhode Island, which is funny with a name like Whitehouse. It's okay if you're a Democrat. If you say nice things about minorities, then you can be as racist as you want to be. And you can belong to racist clubs as long as you're saying that racist clubs shouldn't exist. But they do exist. And if they're going to exist, then you can be a member, but you wish that they didn't exist. And I mean, you are a senator in the United States, probably the only one who's a member of that club. Why can't you use your obvious abstract power to make that change? And of course he could make it a big deal, but he doesn't. And to be fair to Sheldon Whitehouse, which is probably unnecessary because he's a communist, I haven't checked this in a few years, so maybe something's been done. And if you'd like to fact check me, go ahead. And if I see it in the chat, I will definitely read it. But I have a feeling it's probably still like that. Let us continue. More Stephen Miller. And of course, Stephen Miller is the head of AFL, or was. He might not be working in that role currently. But he posted this on X, formerly Twitter, saying judicial coup orders Department of Education to violate federal civil rights law by continuing racial preferences and discrimination. And he's quote tweeting a post from Margot Cleveland, who says, breaking, district court enters injunction effective immediately, barring the Trump administration's implementation of Department of Education efforts to combat DEI. And in addition, they demanded that the plaintiffs submit a $50 bond. Here is the attached screenshot from the decision. Defendants, United States Department of Education, Linda McMahon, in her official capacity as Secretary of the Department of Education, Craig Traynor in his official capacity, their agents, employees, representatives, etc., are enjoined from enforcing and or implementing the Dear Colleague letter issued on February 14th, 2025, including through the February 28th, 2025 FAQ about racial preferences and stereotypes under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, the End DEI portal, and the April 3rd, 2025 certification requirement against the plaintiffs, their members, etc. Let us get a less legalistic interpretation of that. This is from Catholic Vote. Federal judge blocks Trump administration's DEI crackdown in public schools. Wouldn't it be funny if I just hit the AI reader thing and then just took a few minutes off? A federal judge in New Hampshire issued a temporary injunction Thursday blocking the Trump administration's directive aimed at curbing race-based diversity, equity, and inclusion practices in K-12 schools. The ruling halts enforcement of the DOE February 14th memo, which warned schools they could lose federal funding if they failed to certify compliance with new DEI standards. Now, was federal funding used as leverage over the school system to implement certain government standards in the era of the regime? Of course it was. But now that's not okay. Even though the president, as the plenary authority of the executive branch, can determine where the funding goes for everything in the executive branch and can strike any of it if he wants, of course, they've created a rule set to prevent any rogue president from doing that. And until the rule set is either sidestepped or unwound, we have to imagine the rule set still exists and is valid as described by the people who put the rule set in place. Education Secretary Linda McMahon defended the policy as a civil rights measure. Students must be assessed according to merit and accomplishment, not prejudged by the color of their skin, she said in a March statement. We will not yield on this commitment. The ban on DEI embodied in the 2025 letter leaves teachers with a Hobson's choice, wrote District Judge Landia McCafferty. She called the department's standards ill-defined and constitutionally insufficient. The DOE, and they go on with some background. So constitutionally insufficient, that is obviously a subjective interpretation, which is itself constitutionally insufficient. Just saying that my opinion is this is insufficient. And by the way, the legislative branch can eradicate the district courts altogether. And so if that's possible, just how constitutional could the district courts possibly be? So all of this is constitutionally insufficient, but she has deemed that she has the ability through her own decision to prevent the executive branch from removing discriminatory practices, even though the rule set she's appealing to is the one that says you can't have discrimination because they redefine it as discriminating against the people the discrimination is benefiting. Yeah, Trump's the one violating the norms. That's what we've been told over and over and over again. We talked briefly, I think last week, but maybe it was Monday. Time is just... But there was an article in Breitbart about a New Mexico judge who was pals with Tren de Aragua. And so this is the update yesterday from the New York Post. Ex-New Mexico judge and wife arrested for allegedly harboring illegal Tren de Aragua member in their home. A recently resigned New Mexico judge and his wife were arrested in a federal raid on their family home Thursday after it was revealed they harbored an accused member of Tren de Aragua, according to a report. Democratic former Doña Ana County Magistrate Judge Jose Joel Cano and his wife Nancy Cano each face 2 charges of evidence tampering for allegedly harboring Christian Ortega Lopez, an accused illegal migrant who federal officials say is a member of the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua, Fox News reported. Under President Trump, we have arrested over 150,000 aliens, including more than 600 members of the vicious Tren de Aragua gang, Kristi Noem told the outlet. Ortega Lopez, 23, who was apprehended during an ICE raid at the judge's Tony, meaning like kind of high profile, expensive, Las Cruces, New Mexico resident, where the suspected gangbanger lived in a guest house after first ingratiating himself as a handyman, Fox News reported, citing court documents. It really is incredible. the Abrego Garcia thing as well. Apparently now he's not actually a Maryland father. He's a Maryland stepfather, but the news, they just confuse things. They don't tell you he's a criminal or any of that. They don't tell you he's actually a gang member. He has, in his past, I think, been stopped and maybe tried transporting 8 illegal aliens from Houston to Maryland. And this is the guy that Maryland so-called Senator Chris Van Hollen was just down visiting to save this Maryland man, who's not a Maryland man. He's an illegal alien criminal. It is incredible that we are seeing the exposure of how enmeshed the regime is with the illegal immigration program and how much these members of the regime, in a formal sense, are doing directly for these members. Now, could these be psyops to let us know that this is what's been going on? Sure, I guess they could be. And it's always important to keep that stuff in mind. But even if they are, it's still just to expose this is what the system has produced. And we should take note of that. And so now we are in an era of arresting judges. And that is the sort of thing where if you do it without having first achieved some sort of public consensus around your right, ability, and justification for doing it, well, then when they call you a tyrant and a dictator and an autocrat and authoritarian and all the rest of it, well, then that case might stick. And if the people believe that and you're going to go forward anyway, well, then you're going to have to start using state violence or really disrupt things. And if that was going to be the method, I don't think we would have seen the 4-year period where we dealt with a fake and illegitimate president and various parts of society falling apart. They're not going to pursue that route. They want to form public consensus before doing the things that they must do. And that's a pattern that we've seen for a very long time. Now, I don't like the psyop aspect of that. I think the American people are mature enough and responsible enough, and there are enough people who understand that with that jarring period of adjustment to what this reality actually is, we could take care of our fellow citizens. And if we were spoken to in honest ways, we might be able to do that even faster with less fallout. Now, people at a much higher pay grade than I am have determined that's not the case and that we have to take this route. We'll see how that goes. We'll see how the society responds after the fact, once it is understood that a lot of this was based on a whole lot of bullshit. Are people going to be okay with that? I don't know. That's its own problem. And again, the people who just struggle session, make sure everybody agrees with them about who the secret black hats and white hats are, they don't confront questions like that because they don't care about the lies, because they think it's all very clever because of the match game online. For everyone who's not like that, it actually might matter that all of these people in positions of leadership were lying about a great many things the whole time. Okay? And it might matter at some point that they are just installing a new system and convincing people to go into that system. If they don't ever say, hey, we had to get you here. Some of this stuff is not exactly as true as we kind of made it out to be. Are you going to be okay with that? If they don't actually say that at any point, then what is to prevent anyone from the obvious understanding, the surface level interpretation that we would have moved from one system where political and other power is acquired through constant lies and psyops to another system with the exact same qualities? It would be like moving from Coke to Pepsi if the same company owns both Coke and Pepsi. Is that good? No, of course not. All right. Checking the chat briefly. Seeing how everybody's doing. Everybody's still hanging in there. We've been on a roll today. Oh, boy. And we are not going to come even close to all the stuff I had lined up. So let us hear from the Attorney General Trump's designee within the executive branch at one of those constitutionally illegitimate agencies that must be removed. But nonetheless, here is Pam Bondi talking about Judge Cano.
I mean, when you look at the associations with this violent Venezuelan gang, Tren de Aragua, and this person that they harbored in their home, he was showing signs through clothing, we were told, tattoos. There was evidence through voice messages and text messages of his association to TDA. So what charges will Cano and his wife face, if any?
So Judge Cano, soon to be former Judge Cano, got his charges were just unsealed. He's charged with obstruction. He admitted post Miranda. He took one of the TDA members' cell phones himself, took it, beat it with a hammer, destroyed it, and then walked the pieces to a city dumpster to dispose of it to protect him. The wife also is charged with destroying evidence. Sandra, not only that, this TDA member, and he had on a necklace that said kill, something about death. He had tattoos all over him. He also had on his cell phone pictures of two decapitated victims, decapitated, gruesome photos. And he was sending them out. And whoever he was sending them to was sending back saying, hey, you need to be careful. You shouldn't be sending these. You shouldn't be texting these photos out. Not only that, these two, the judge and his wife, gave him assault rifles that belonged to their daughter. That's what they're charged with. In the criminal report affidavit, he goes to a shooting range with these assault rifles, with a suppressor, with other known TDA members, and they're shooting. This is the last person that we want in our country, nor will we ever tolerate a judge or anyone else harboring them.
So there is Pam Bondi. And obviously everybody's pretty aware by now of the kind of, it might just be not controlled opposition in a bad way. I mean, you can think it's bad if you like to think it's bad, but more of like kind of the kayfabe variety where there is a pressure campaign from people like Steve Bannon, who also might be just totally straightforward with it. I happen, if you've listened to the show for any amount of time, you understand that I think that Steve Bannon is at a much higher level of access and input. So I don't think that this is just Steve Bannon getting upset that things are not rolling along at the speed he prefers. But he's been part of the recent campaign to put a little more pressure on Pam Bondi and Kash Patel and try to have some of these people wrapped up. I mean, we're in a late stage rerun exposure phase of all the Russiagate stuff, and they're all walking around free as far as we know. So we talked about this, actually, Gordon and I did on Saturday night last week on Devolution Power Hour. We can understand that there might be something else going on and be patient and continue to support, not lose hope, not lose faith, etc. We can also demand that more things happen because that's what we have to do as the people. This is unacceptable. We demand more. And as we do that and other people hear those demands and say to themselves, yeah, these people are criminals. Why are they still walking around out there? Well, then more people demand it. Because at some point you have to get public consensus behind the things that need to be done. Because they're outside the rule set as it's been described to us throughout our entire lives. We need to move outside of that. Moving outside of that successfully requires consensus, which requires the people taking it upon themselves to say, we can see where the next step is. We want to get to that next step. And because the government is our agent, the government works for us, we are going to demand that we get to that next step. And it doesn't have to be in a negative way that tears down people's understanding that Trump is ultimately working on our side or that things are going to change for the better. You don't have to do it in a way that tears that down at all. I'm not suggesting that. I've never suggested that. Again, I'm still as optimistic as I ever was about these things coming out well, but it's the people's responsibility to demand these things. Because even if those people were right about every element of the plan, which by definition they can't be because they're wrong all the time, even if that was the case, there's going to be a point at which the plan is no more. And there will only be an agenda. And that agenda's got to be achieved on behalf of the people by the people. If there's just a plan and everything's under control forever, then you have no choice whatsoever. And hey, maybe that's just the way life is. But to be a proponent of that with a government where you trust literally one person is insane. Let us pause for a moment to, as I've said before, Rumble has provided the Rumble Studio platform to support the creators, and in response, I like to support the Rumble platform and support them as they support me. So we'll pause for a quick ad. This sponsorship is from Rumble, one that is incredibly important to the survival of the company. When Rumble first started in 2013, they built the platform for the small creator. They didn't censor or have biases. They were fair and treated all creators equally. No one thought platforms would censor political conversation or censor opinions on COVID, but they did. Facebook admitted they fell to pressure from the Biden and Harris administration. Rumble did not. They held the line. They're attacked daily for giving us a voice to talk to you. They're attacked in corporate media. They are attacked by governments like France. They are attacked from brand advertisers who refuse to work with them. Corporate America is fighting to remove speech. Rumble is fighting to keep it. Rumble won't survive with brand advertisers. They don't get much of it. Watching our show on Rumble is the most they can ask from you. But if you really believe in this fight and you have the means, one major way you can help Rumble survive is by joining Rumble Premium. Join the community that believes in the First Amendment and believes in our human right to free speech. Rumble is offering $10 off with promo code STUDIO when you purchase an annual subscription. Go to rumble.com/premium and use promo code STUDIO. Like I said, if you have the means and believe in the cause, now is the time to join Rumble Premium. If you don't have the means, we are just happy you watch this show and, I will say, the Badlands shows, of course, on the Rumble platform. This is our parallel system. The rule set on the old system on YouTube was corrupted. We have a new system that is not perfect, and obviously we don't reach as many people, but it allows us to speak, and it's continually improving itself in the right directions, which is what we want from the parallel system. We're going to have to suffer the drawbacks of moving parallel. It's everybody's choice about whether or not they accept the drawbacks. And then when we move to the better system, to the parallel system, as it improves, those drawbacks are reduced to the point where eventually we just have an equal system. More people flood to that because it's uncorrupted, and then they have the resources to become a better system. And that's how it's got to work, again, in all these various domains. So let us continue. That's not the only arrest of a judge. We are now into a judges being arrested phase. FBI Director Kash Patel on X, formerly Twitter. Just now, the FBI arrested Judge Hannah Dugan out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin on charges of obstruction after evidence of Judge Dugan obstructing an immigration arrest operation last week. We believe Judge Dugan intentionally misdirected federal agents away from the subject to be arrested in her courthouse, Eduardo Flores Ruiz, allowing the subject, an illegal alien, to evade arrest. Thankfully, our agents chased down the perp on foot, and he's been in custody since. But the judge's obstruction created increased danger to the public. We will have more to share soon. Excellent work, FBI Milwaukee. And continuing on that one, this is CNBC from today. Federal authorities arrest 2 judges, escalating Trump immigration crackdown. I can't talk. It's 2 hours, 20 minutes in. These sorts of things happen. Federal authorities have arrested a former New Mexico judge and a Wisconsin judge in two separate cases, accusing them of interfering with Trump administration immigration enforcement efforts. Milwaukee Circuit Court Judge Hannah Dugan was arrested Friday morning and charged with obstruction for allegedly helping an undocumented immigrant evade arrest after he appeared in her courtroom last week. Dugan's arrest came one day after federal authorities arrested a former New Mexico judge. We just talked about that. The actions against judges mark a sharp escalation in the Trump administration's efforts to remove undocumented immigrants from the United States. Nobody should be surprised by the arrest of two judges, Tom Homan said. And you know what? We'll just skip directly to Tom Homan's point here and read his full post. He said, nobody should be surprised by the arrest of two judges. I've said many times within the past months that people can choose to support illegal immigration and not assist ICE in removing criminal illegal aliens from our communities. But don't cross that line. If you actively impede our enforcement efforts, or if you knowingly harbor or conceal illegal aliens from ICE, you will be prosecuted. These actions are felonies. More to come. And he signed it, Thomas D. Homan, U.S. Border Czar. I'm not sure that that is his official title, although at this point, who knows, it might be. Let me see where we're going to be able to get today. It's so funny. I have like a it's grown so much over the course of the week. I have a Pete Hegseth segment that is now like 20 things long, which could probably be a show all by itself. Maybe I will just forego the Pete Hegseth stuff once again. I mean, gosh, the Pete Hegseth stuff has been covered at such length in so many places. And we got into a little bit of it today on Badlands Daily. I'm sure Brian's been covering it all week. There's some interesting stuff that I found, particularly comments from Steve Bannon that tie back into some of the big donors. Maybe we'll just skip directly to that. A couple more things before we get there. This is in regards to a Trump executive order filed yesterday. So let's first watch this, then we'll get some Times coverage, then we'll get into the order itself.
Trump's campaign of retribution is now taking direct aim at the Democratic Party's top fundraising platform, Act Blue. Just in the past few hours, the president signed a memorandum directing Attorney General Pam Bondi to, quote, investigate allegations regarding the unlawful use of online fundraising platforms to make straw or dummy contributions or foreign contributions to political candidates and committees, and to take all appropriate actions to enforce the law. Congressional Republicans have separately been investigating these claims of straw and foreign donations, which thus far have been unsubstantiated. Now, for those at home who may not be familiar with the name Act Blue, it is widely considered to be one of the pillars of the Democrats' digital ecosystem. It has given them a significant advantage over Republicans in terms of small dollar fundraising. And it's not just presidential candidates, also candidates for congressional, state, and local races. Odds are, if you have donated to a Democratic candidate or a Democratic cause in the past several years, it's probably been through Act Blue. And this move by the president today could have major consequences for Democratic candidates, potentially hurting their ability to bring in donations and therefore compete in future elections. And it comes as the Associated Press is reporting that in the first 3 months of this year alone, donors have given more than $400 million to Democratic candidates through Act Blue, which is the most money raised in any first quarter in the organization's 2-decade history. In response to this memorandum, Act Blue said in a statement, the Trump administration's and GOP's targeting of Act Blue is part of their brazen attack on democracy in America. Today's escalation by the White House is blatantly unlawful. needs to be seen for what it is. Donald Trump's latest front in his campaign to stamp out all political, electoral, and ideological opposition. This administration continues to weaponize the instruments of federal power in an unprecedented assault on our democracy. Act Blue will immediately pursue all legal avenues to protect and defend itself against the administration's baseless claims.
Baseless claims, always baseless claims. And you have to love how they say, or she says right there, that these claims against Act Blue are unsubstantiated. If I recall, the New York Times, of course, Maggie Haberman, used the same term in discussing the claims about the scam that is Act Blue. And you can look up Act Blue with smurfing. You can go to the Project Veritas investigation of Act Blue. Essentially what they were doing was taking in large sums of dark money, what amounts to dark money, and then donating that money via different people's identities without their knowledge to the Democrat Party, making them all appear as small dollar donations going through individual Americans, which is really funny. We talked about this a few months back with the whole Bernie Sanders thing. Bernie Sanders, one of his selling points in 2015 was that he was receiving all these small dollar donations from all these different Americans, which is what made him so popular. And that's the proof that he wasn't the corporate candidate. He was the choice of the small dollar donors. Well, with this system totally exposed, you can see that actually that doesn't mean anything at all. And he was probably receiving money in the very same way, or if not a very similar sort of way. Now he doesn't care about those donations anymore. That's not a selling point for Bernie Sanders anymore. Now they want to protect Act Blue. They all want to protect Act Blue. Act Blue is essentially a money laundering pass-through that allows them to pay off political entities that help them steal elections and then sell those stolen elections to the people as legitimate. I don't want to go through this entire New York Times article, but some of what they had to say about the reaction from Democrats was really interesting. It'll be the third time in 3 weeks that Trump has directed the government to target a perceived political enemy, a drastic expansion of his use of powers to try to damage domestic opponents. And we were told that nothing the Biden administration did, the quote unquote Biden administration did, nor any of the efforts within states or any of the rest of it to go after the American people, to go after Catholic churches, to go after parents at school board meetings, to go after J6, to go after anyone involved in election integrity, and the list goes on and on and on, all the way up to Donald Trump. None of that was political persecution. All of that was related to actual crimes. And now what Donald Trump is doing is going beyond the prescribed authority of the executive branch to pursue his political opponents. And it's not because they committed crimes, even though they did commit crimes. They're not arresting judges because they're political opponents. They're arresting judges because they've committed crimes. They're not pursuing these law firms, for instance, because they're political opponents. They're pursuing them because they committed crimes. And as far as the law firms go, Donald Trump can do that even if he just doesn't like them. It doesn't even have to be a crime or anything. But we're talking about law firms that have been involved in the commission of and protection of crimes against America. Of course he's going to go after these things and enforce the law. But if they can portray it as a political persecution, well, then they have the ability to prevent consensus from forming with the parallel system, which may just be the original system wound back or a system parallel. They want to maintain the rule set, and any violation of that rule set as it stands now, regardless of whether it's a violation of the actual rule set or regardless of whether or not it violates anyone's sense of justice and rightness, They're going to prevent people from moving to the new rule set. So that's what the information war aspect is for. Let us continue. Mr. Trump plans to call for an investigation by Attorney General Pam Bondi into Act Blue, which is used across the Democrat Party's ecosystem to collect donations online. The inquiry is ostensibly meant to look into possible illegal donations made by people in someone else's name, known as straw donations, as well as hard dollar contributions from foreign donors. And those two things, as I said, can be combined. Foreign, the global philanthropists, pushing money through Act Blue. And of course, just for the record, they call George Soros an American. If anyone could possibly be more of a foreign donor, I don't know who it could be, but they call him American. Mr. Trump's impending action represents a threat to one of the key financial cogs of the left, potentially hindering Democrats' ability to compete in elections. It is likely to please elements of his base for whom Act Blue has become a top target. Congressional Republicans have been separately investigating what they claim are the platform's insufficient security provisions. And of course, they're taking a half measures only approach that won't solve anything because they have their parallel on, quote unquote, the right, which is win red. For days, Democrat groups have been worried that the White House was planning executive orders or memorandums that would target an array of nonprofit organizations. White House officials insisted no such orders were being drafted and maintained that stance for days. And of course, now they're lying. On Thursday, Politico and other news outlets reported that Mr. Trump planned to sign an Act Blue memorandum later in the day. The person briefed on the preparations, blah, blah, blah. Sorry, this doesn't have the highlights. I was hoping. Here it is. There's great fear across the Democrat Party that any of the entities that have used Act Blue could soon find themselves enmeshed in an investigation into foreign contributions from a hostile Justice Department with direction from Mr. Trump. As word of the impending Trump memorandum circulated among Democrats, panicked Democrats blasted fundraising appeals. And they show Ruben Gallego begging for money, saying, "This might be the last time that I can ever receive money this way. Please give it to me so I have an emergency fund." Well, can't you just get it through other platforms? Don't people want to give you money? Is it all just the fraud and money laundering? Is it all just the foreign donations? Is it all just the globalist philanthropist money that's coming to you, Ruben Gallego? Is this going to make it impossible to steal elections? Gosh, that's terrible. I can't believe that's going to happen to you, Ruben Gallego, who, you know, you're not actually you're not legitimate in the first place. These people are incredible. It's going to break down their whole system, making sure that fraud and foreign donations can't happen is going to break down their whole system. And when you read that, when you're talking about the entities that are connected to Act Blue, you have to, in my mind, you have to think about Executive Order 13818, certain sanctions on those foreign actors' influence in federal elections. I didn't state the title of it correctly, but Executive Order 13848 talks about sanctions and the rest against actors involved in interference, foreign interference in American elections, specifically federal elections. And so if there are foreign donors using Act Blue as a platform, and that is through the fraud and the malfeasance, interference in our electoral process, you can see a whole range of options available to the president and the executive branch through that executive order, which, by the way, Biden maintained, or the auto pen, I should say, maintained throughout that devolution term. You could see how that might immediately apply in this case and could potentially explain some of the panic. Because if they take down Act Blue, that's a huge problem for Democrats, a huge problem for the system, because win red, of course, would then be the next domino to fall, one would expect. But to then go after the foreign actors funneling money through Act Blue, that's a whole different level. And We may see some kind of coordination that would have happened through a platform like FTX. And at that point, things could get very interesting. I think we may wrap up on this. Maybe, oh man, I want to do this Peter Thiel thing, but maybe we'll save that for Monday. Apparently, Peter Thiel's getting back in the game. And actually, you know what? We are going to save that for Monday because amazingly, he just did an interview with Jordan Peterson. And my friend Oro, who keeps me apprised of these things in my Telegram chat, listens to it and said it's not really worth listening to. But as I think Peter Thiel is a critical figure in all of this, I am going to attempt to listen to that over the weekend. So maybe we can talk about that article and that podcast on Monday. Let's go through this. Let me just take one more look at what we have here. Man, I was going to bring it all the way back around to Ron DeSantis, but maybe we'll hold off on that. So let's go to, I said we were going to go to Trump's executive order or memorandum or whatever it's called. Presidential memoranda. Investigation into unlawful straw donor and foreign contributions in American elections. Federal law strictly prohibits making political contributions in the name of another person, as well as contributions by foreign nationals. So right there, it's already against the law in their rule set. Notwithstanding these laws designed to protect American democracy, press reports and investigations by congressional committees have generated extremely troubling evidence that online fundraising platforms have been willing participants in schemes to launder excessive and prohibited contributions to political candidates and committees. Specifically, these reports raise concerns that malign actors are seeking to evade federal source and amount limitations on political contributions by breaking down large contributions from one source into many smaller contributions, nominally attributed to numerous other individuals, potentially without the consent or even knowledge of the putative contributors. The reports also raise concerns that such straw donations are being made through dummy accounts, potentially using gift cards or prepaid credit cards to evade detection. So what you can see is a massive, sprawling system to commit a crime, which is a conspiracy to commit a crime, and the people are all profiting from the commission of that crime together, which makes it an enterprise. It is coordinated in a criminal conspiracy, and that immediately means that it has the potential for RICO. So can this be part of RICO Grande, adding in Executive Order 13848 and all the election interference, and then we get into the other parts as well. So while people want to see arrests, and I get it, I think, and I've said on this podcast countless times, and I'm badly in countless times, but I think everything's just going to come down at once with the entire thing prosecuted as RICO. Everyone in the public will already understand that all the crimes have been committed by those who are accused. And so when they see those people held accountable, they're totally going to understand. The consensus will have already formed to something outside of that system, as that system is then systematically punished. And I think that's where we're going. I hope that's where we're going. That is the source of some of my optimism. If that's not happening, who knows? I mean, at that point, if that's not happening, if that's not the strategy, then holding people accountable may well be impossible. And maybe we have to engage more with what that world might look like. It's possible that that has been something that has lacked in our analysis over the years. That is one of the places that we may well be wrong. And that would be very, very unfortunate, because we are not on track unless this legal system is removed. There's no way that all of the people who need to be prosecuted could be prosecuted individually in our lifetimes or theirs, or on any timeline that could result in our country actually being rid of this problem. So it kind of has to be an all-at-once approach, I think. And I have, like this, good reason to believe that's what's going on. Where are we? Okay. Further, there is evidence to suggest that foreign nationals are seeking to misuse online fundraising platforms to improperly influence American elections. A recent House of Representatives investigation revealed that a platform named Act Blue had in recent years detected at least 22 significant fraud campaigns, nearly half of which had a foreign nexus. During a 30-day window during the 2024 campaign, the platform detected 237 donations from foreign IP addresses using prepaid cards, indicating that this activity remains a pressing concern. These activities undermine the integrity of our electoral process. Therefore, I direct the Attorney General, in consultation with the Secretary of the Treasury, to use all lawful authority as necessary to investigate allegations regarding the unlawful use of online fundraising platforms to make straw or dummy contributions or foreign contributions to political candidates and committees, and to take all appropriate actions to enforce the law. So again, the executive order is pursuing something that is already against the law by those designated to pursue that, enforcing under the law everything in their lawful authority. That is the president's duty. And of course, we're going to see that is, and we can see in the coverage already, that is framed as a political persecution, another political investigation, an investigation against political opponents. Trump is trying to take some undue advantage by bringing down Act Blue. And of course, for whoever believes that right now, and there are, of course, some standard issue villagers on the uniparty left who would absolutely believe that, and probably some on the uniparty right as well. When that hits win red, is it going to be that he's going after his political opponents? That's going to be a hard case to make, unless you want to admit that you're part of a uniparty, and then we can make it. Let's do just one more bit, and then we'll wrap things up for this day and this week. And I want to return just briefly to the Time interview with Donald Trump. And once again, shout out my pal Starborn for bringing this to my attention just as I was going live today. This part is about election fraud, and he just gave us an example of election interference in the 2024 election, an election that he has many times called fake. Let's just remember.
Sports has always been something that Americans rally around to come together. They really do. You won the popular vote. You won all the swing states. But still, Kamala Harris got 75 million votes in the country.
Well, if you believe the whole thing.
Okay. Let's just say
it is ridiculous.
That the election was as it was.
Excuse me. There are 7 swing states. I won them all.
You did
by a lot.
But let me just get to the dismount here.
And I won the popular
Have
vote.
you thought about how to try to bring the country together?
The whole thing is ridiculous. And I've also showed you Donald Trump saying that we have fake elections. He said that during the signing of this very election integrity order. So he's mentioned it again in 2024. Does that mean our elections are fixed because Donald Trump won? No, sure doesn't. You know who told us that would be the case? Those same truthers I was talking about before. Isn't that weird? They just want you to vote hard and then trust the election results, no matter how those results go. And they want to call everybody who's in the system as a result of those fake elections a legitimate representative who has actual power. And they believe that everything has to be fixed within this rule set, within this system. That is indistinguishable from the GOP establishment. And of course, all these people are lifelong GOP members and neocons. It's indistinguishable. The only difference is that they like Q posts and that they like Donald Trump more than the rest of the establishment. But after Trump leaves, they're more than happy to accept J.D. Vance or whoever they're told to grovel for. Isn't that strange? Because that's exactly what standard issue villagers on the Uniparty right are doing. What's the point of being a truther? Let's go to Donald Trump in this Time magazine interview. The interviewer says, "You recently said you were not joking about seeking a third." Oh, no, sorry. That is not the right part at all. Here we are. Back to, wait a second. Sorry to do this on the fly. I thought I had. It's not that. Is it just Krebs? Is it just Krebs that I wanted to do? No, I'm certain that they're. Hold for processing for just a moment. Apologies all around. I know what I wanted to do. There it is. Okay. So here we are. Now they have this leads in with questions about Donald Trump and his adjustments to the way public health has been run in the country. And so from that, the interviewer says, NIH is the world's largest funder of cancer research. Of course, he's trying to protect the system. And Trump said, shouldn't they be asking those questions? I could give you a list of abuse and waste and fraud, and you don't have any interest in hearing it. I mean, I just see by these questions, just wondering, with all the bad things that have happened, with all the things we found, you have no interest in those things. You only have an interest. So what's this? And Trump trails off in his sentences and you kind of understand what he's saying. But when you read the transcript, it's not quite so straightforward. So what about this? What about that? Our country is going to be strong again because of what we're doing. And this is not a sustainable model, what we're looking at. And I think very importantly, I had a great election, won all 7 swing states, won millions and millions of votes, won millions of votes. They say it was the most consequential election in 129 years. I don't know if that's right, but it certainly was a big win. And that's despite cheating that took place, by the way, because there was plenty of cheating that took place. In 24, the interviewer asks. 24, yeah, 20, of course, but 24 also. They tried. They tried that. They did their best. It's the only thing they're good at. But we're going to have a great country again. Just remember, every single question you're asking, I campaigned on it. I campaigned on all the things you're talking about, all the things you're asking about, and openly campaigned. And we're giving credit, even by radical left lunatics. We are giving credit for that. We're giving credit for saying, this is what I'm going to do. If you look at your questions, that's what I campaigned on. And so he is describing exactly correctly the dynamic I've been talking about throughout this entire episode. He is creating consensus around the new system, the parallel system, or alternatively, the unwinding to the original system. But one thing he's not doing is concerning himself with the restrictions set up in the multiple false reality layers of this particular rule set. He's telling this interviewer, I campaigned on this. I have a clear, obvious, and overwhelming mandate to implement the agenda upon which I campaign. The people know it. I know it. Everyone recognizes it. It's happening. And you're asking me why the other system isn't good enough, or shouldn't you respect these parts of the other system, or aren't people going to die of cancer more if you stop funding the NIH that did COVID? Insane. All of it's insane. And it's thinking from within that bubble. It's systematic thinking. They're systems-oriented thinking is what I should say. That interviewer is there as a protector of the system, trying to make Donald Trump look bad so that people will not choose his system. People have already chosen. It's a matter of operating within that system so that we can strengthen it and bringing other people over into that system. It's not a matter of sitting back and applauding. As the PSYOPs progress, the PSYOPs wouldn't have to go this far if everyone realized they were PSYOPs and just agreed, oh, I see how it's supposed to be. But no, instead we have to wake up the normies, right? I mean, that's their best explanation for the purpose of this duration. If we're going to do that, they're going to have to figure out the truth at some point. I mean, maybe people think it's just good enough to get them on our side. But again, first of all, that's already been achieved. And second, that's the same thing the old system does. We need to move to the different rule set. We need to strengthen the parallel systems. All right. I'll check the chat in just a second, but I am going to just quickly do one more of these ads on behalf of Rumble, as Rumble operates on behalf of me. Weak coffee is for the weak, and at Rumble, weak has never been part of the mission. No fillers, no fraud, and no settling for mediocrity, just like 1775 coffee. It's single origin, small farm, hand-picked, specialty grade coffee that stands for quality, free speech, and calling out BS when it matters. Forget stale, mass-produced beans, roasted just enough to hide the flaws. Dark roast hits like a Trump tariff. Medium roast keeps it bold without the bitterness, and Vitality Mushroom Blend, real energy and lasting focus, no synthetic garbage. For K-Cup pods, whole bean, or fresh ground coffee, go to 1775coffee.com and use code STUDIO for 15% off. Start your morning with coffee that stands for something. Oh, and every dollar spent enters you to win a Cybertruck and $30,000 cash. And I'm just going to take a quick look at the chat. I hope you guys all enjoyed yourselves today. Caramaga, $10. Great show as always. Thank you, and thank you for your ongoing continued support. Also, I always forget to say this on my own show. I never forget on Badlands shows. But on my own show, I do because, subscriber streams, I don't care about the thumbs up on those. But if you're watching on Rumble, please go ahead and hit the thumbs up. Maybe someday that sort of thing will help. And maybe if many people hear this all the way to this point and do it, hey, just asking. And with that, we're going to wrap up this week. I hope all of you are... Polymath says, I want another Rumble ad about nukes. That was fantastic. Yeah, they don't keep giving me that one. I cannot imagine it's because they were thoroughly dissatisfied with my last one. I think the last one was one of the greatest ads ever. But yeah, I haven't seen that one in a while. I don't know what to say about that. It's so ridiculous. But okay, I hope you guys all had a great week. I hope you have a great weekend. We will... I'll be back on Monday at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. Don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic, and Joe Biden was never president.
Well,
what?
You know who I am, don't you?
Well, you ain't Fiona Apple, and if you ain't Fiona Apple, I don't give a rat's ass.
What's wrong with being an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times? What do you think, Max?
Do you want to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times?
Yeah, I think I'd like to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times.
It's not true. It's more true than I would perhaps prefer.
Can we stop this cruel game and allow the boy to keep one shred of dignity? For God's sakes! I can't stand to see him in all this pain. You vicious bastards! Let him move in with you. Is it so bad to see somebody happy? So just let him move in. For the love of God, let the boy move in with you. Good Lord.
And I will not let you down.
We do a little trolling. It's called We Do a Little Trolling.
What? In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening for free and would like to support the show, the best way to do that is by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can find the info stream over on Telegram at t.me/veryreasonable. The merch site is cancelcouture.com, and for all my other links, you can visit linktree.com/I'm your moderator. And I'll see you soon. Down on the range.